Right. Okay. So with the UK attempting to become China's strongest European economic partner, France leaning towards Russia's position in Syria, Germany strengthening its ties with Erdogan and Turkey, are our NATO allies really aligned with each other's interests? Does NATO still have credibility?
Gosh, whoever wrote these questions, good job. These are good questions. Well, look, you heard Donald Trump the other day in his wisdom, basically calling NATO into question. But I think that unless you have decisive American leadership, this is good. You know, these sorts of different directions, this kind of freelancing of foreign policy is going to happen. You know, one of the reasons why you want a powerful America and a confident America that does lead is you don't want your allies, whether they're allies, friends, frenemies, you don't want them freelancing their foreign policy in ways that are ultimately inimical to some of your core interests. And it's a core interest of the United States to have broadly united policies when it comes to something like Russia and its invasion of Ukraine, China, and the threats it poses to the South China Sea. And by the way, since Britain was mentioned, China's appalling behavior in Hong Kong and the destruction of Hong Kong autonomy in violation of the Sino-British Agreement of 1984. This is a reminder of why you need to revivify NATO. Part of that is insisting that the Europeans live up to their military spending commitments. But part of that is also maintaining a sense of the importance of the Atlantic Alliance. You know, all the talk of the last 8 years has been the pivot to Asia, and the obsessions have been around the Middle East. I think we shortchanged Europe. We thought we had Europe solved. And it turns out not at all. Not at all economically, not at all politically, not at all geostrategically. But Europe is still 20, 25% of global GDP. They're our strongest trading partners. They're a huge part of the world. And it's premature, to say the least, to sort of write off Europe and say, well, the future lies in China or India or elsewhere. It is the most important relationship that the United States has and will have.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think the U.S. has an interest in Europe staying unified. We should not be agnostic about the future of the EU. And I think working together with them to deal with the refugee situation, to approach Syria, you know, together, and to be clear that, you know, we want to see the UK and Greece and others stay in and stay unified is important. But in terms of NATO, you know, we have a fundamental shift in Russia's behavior under Vladimir Putin. We have really a resurgent Russia, a Russia that feels that it wasn't well treated after the Cold War. It feels aggrieved. If there's, you know, very strong nationalist sort of sentiments in Russia. And, you know, Putin has failed to do anything to really diversify the Russian economy and set them up for future success. And so he's tapping into that nationalist sentiment by going into reclaim Crimea, or trying to reestablish a sphere of influence by invading eastern Ukraine, or projecting power into the Middle East to show the world that, you know, Russia's back as a great power. You know, that kind of Russia, which I think is going to be with us for the foreseeable future, is a threat to Europe. And we, as NATO, have to sort of, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, think about what does it mean to make a mutual defense commitment? What kind of capabilities do we need? What kind of posture do we need? How do we make very clear to Putin that we have the resolve and the capability to deter any sort of action against the Baltics or any other NATO members? So really reinvesting in deterrence and reassurance in Europe, you know, that was sort of dismissed as, oh, Cold War thinking. Well, we have a Cold War thinking leader in Russia who has made substantial military investments and who has demonstrated his willingness to break international law and come across international borders. Europe has to be an area of focus for us again.
You know, I think what Putin has demonstrated is, let me backtrack. I once spoke with a Russian who had been involved with Putin's government in its very early months, and then this gentleman figured out that Putin was not a reformist, and he fled the country. The first of many, I might add. And he made an observation to me, which I found fascinating. He said this to me about 10 years ago. He said, you know, Putin does not conduct a foreign policy per se. He conducts operations, which is a really interesting insight. You know, if you're Henry Kissinger, you think about foreign policy, or Michèle Flournoy, like, you know, the direction that the country takes over years, and Putin is a spy, and spies conduct operations. And if you think of every single foreign policy move, major foreign policy move that Russia has made, the invasion of Georgia, cutting off gas to Ukraine in the middle of winter, the way in which he entered Syria, the little green men in Crimea, the starting a bogus revolution in eastern Ukraine. It's all been done as operations, right? That's what NATO should expect in a Latvia or an Estonia, countries that have large ethnic Russian populations. What happens if tomorrow there's an incident? Let's say a Russian Orthodox church is defaced in Lithuania. And there is suddenly a popular movement for the defense of orthodoxy, and people march into a street. And these people somehow are wearing watches that are not in Lithuania's time zone. This happened, by the way, in Ukraine. But there's a popular unrest. This is the way in which it would happen. And so this ambiguous form of warfare, which is to say not Warsaw Pact troops pouring across the Fulda Gap, but a situation which would force Ukrainian authorities to maybe clamp down, have an incident. That's the way in which he's going to act. The country that worries me most right now is Moldova, which is not a member of NATO, but it's a European country that would like to be a part of the West. And I was very dispirited in the president's interview with Jeff Goldberg. Jeff brought up Moldova as an example. And the president's answer, to me, made it seem crystal clear that if Russia were to try to seize Moldova, and we were told to get wonky, there's a Russian enclave, I've been there, believe it or not, called Transnistria on the other side of the Dniester River. They still wear Soviet insignia. It's a bizarre place. That he sort of said, well, you know, Moldova, it's clear we're not going to go to war for Moldova. And probably most of you are saying, thank God we're not going to go to war for Moldova. But if you're Moldovan, you're going, I think the president just signed us into Russia's sphere of influence. Those signals become invitations, just as when Dean Acheson in 1950 foolishly suggested that South Korea was not in America's core sphere, and it was seen as an invitation to Kim Il-sung to invade. So we have to also be careful at the political level, even when you're giving interviews to Jeff, what you say. All right, should we go to the next question?
Yes, yeah.
This is for you, right?
I think you're going backwards.
Am I going backwards? Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry. Okay. Can Israel depend on the U.S.'s unconditional support? Is unconditional support still in America's interest?